to this episode of Equalizer. I'm your host, William Acosta. Today's guest is a retired DEA Assistant Special Agent in charge, Richard T. Sanchez, a highly respected federal investigator and leader whose career has taken him from the highway of Texas as state trooper to the front lines of international narcotic enforcement across the U.S., Mexican border, Latin America, and Europe. Over more than 21 years with the Drug Enforcement Administration, Richard led multi-agency task force in McAllen, Texas, helped steer sensitive operations through the DEA Special Operations Division, and ultimately served as an ASAC of the DEA's Europe Division, where he built a strategic partnership with the U.S. and foreign law enforcement and intelligence services to target some of the world's most powerful transnational criminal organizations. Today, Richard joins Equalizer not only as a veteran federal agent, but as the president and CEO of One Team Global, a company dedicated to resilience, post-traumatic growth, and leadership development, and as the author of the upcoming book, Chasing the High, a deeply personal hybrid biography that examines the hidden battle, moral dilemmas, and search for purpose behind a life spent in high-risk operations. Hi, Richard. Welcome to this episode of Equalizer. Thank you for being here with me today.
No, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your time. And more importantly, thank you for your service. It's individuals and gentlemen like you that your legacy continues to live long after your career. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Richard. And I'm so happy to have you here. Let's start this conversation by telling me a little bit about yourself and specifically about your books. Not only the one that is coming out, but the other books and your company.
So One Team Global is a company that we focus and emphasize on resiliency, post-traumatic growth, and helping law enforcement officers in the arena of growing past trauma. We all go through trauma. We've all been through trauma. We all have a story that we can share. What's traumatic to me may not be traumatic to you, and vice versa. But nevertheless, trauma is trauma, and we all handle it very different ways. So what we've done, a good friend of mine and I, Eddie Weiss, who has kind of been at the forefront of recognizing the importance of sharing the story that I have and my personal conflicts and battles and fighting demons that I've gone through, putting it on paper. So the first book we wrote was called Rising Through the Ashes. And what that was and what that is a book that kind of is the intro to Chasing the High. It was kind of laying the foundation for planting the seed, in essence, to saying, okay, this is what you have to look forward to in Chasing the High. And these are some of the challenges that I faced. And then the Warrior Code is a book on leadership. And the challenges that we face in the leadership arena, not only in law enforcement, but in the corporate world. And what we wanted to do was show the commonalities and how the corporate world and law enforcement actually run parallel when it comes to leading or lack thereof leadership. From one moment to the next, you're thrust into a leadership position, very little training, and a lot of times, especially in the law enforcement arena, you don't have the background or not invested in to procure those leadership capabilities. It's based off of how you do on a test and how you do in an interview and your work ethic. And then the last one, Chasing the High, is just a personal biography of what I went through as a child, the demons that I carried in my backpack, how essentially I hit rock bottom just like an addict. And it was through the grace of God and through relationships that I formulated through mentorships and people just came into my life like yourself that saw something that we could highlight and advocate and help educate.
Yeah, it was very important to me when I saw your book and the intro to your book, because I saw a lot of things about my own life and about how it was, coming from a single parent household. Good. My mother raised two children by herself, and through her work ethic, working in factories and doing all types of odd jobs, she was able to make my brother a doctor. And I didn't turn out that bad. I went into the military at a very, very early age to be able to help her a little bit with the little bit of money that I was making. Um, when you think of yourself as a boy, what word best describes that boy? And is it the same word you use for yourself today?
So that boy was angry. He was lost. He was frail. He was a fighter, but used those that fighting in the wrong way at the time. Today, as a grown man, father, a husband, I'm not angry anymore. I'm still a fighter, but I fight now not for myself, but for people that are afraid to fight for themselves, and that's huge. You don't lose that about you.
What do you learn about trust from watching the adults in your life lie to each other and to you on a regular basis?
For me, trust was paramount as a child, and you grow up with none of that. You also grow up with a lot of fear, and um, being afraid of voicing yourself, being afraid of uh, doing what's right. At the same time, you don't really know what's right. My father was a heroin junkie, a bank robber, and my mom a prostitute, which I found out later on in my years. My grandparents came and got my brother and I from a shelter when we were very, very young, and this was my paternal grandparents. My brother and I have different dads, so essentially they took my brother in so he and I would not be separated. So trust, um, it took a long time for me to accept that, um, and accept it from others, because you always knew that, with comfort would come disappointment.
Was there a moment when you realized other kids' parents didn't live the way yours did, and how did that realization hit you at a young age?
Well, so you don't know what you don't know. I mean, um, we grew up in a very small town, Floresville, which at the time was about 2,500 people, and everybody knew everybody. Being raised by my grandparents, my grandfather was the first Hispanic mayor of the town, um, but it was overshadowed with the behavior of his three eldest sons, to include my father. They were heroin addicts and in and out of prison. And now, because of that, the kids that you would call good kids weren't allowed to play with us. They wanted nothing to do with us, and understandably so. However, as a child, you don't know why you can't go to little Johnny's house and play, and it has to do with who your parents are and where you come from. Um, so it wasn't until I was a freshman in high school where I was at my next door neighbor's house, and he was getting into a fight with his dad. And the elderly lady that was there, it was like my second grandmother, called the police. And in a small town like that, troopers notoriously show up to assist the small town police officers. And one of the troopers that showed up ended up being, or was, the nephew to the elder lady that lived there. And he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, Albert wanted me to come watch him beat up his dad." So he goes, "Well, Richard, you're going down a wrong road." Um, I said, "Okay." He goes, "I just promoted and I'm being sent to Harlingen, Texas. Why don't you come spend some time with my family and I? And during the day, you can watch his two daughters, who were very young at the time. And at night, you can ride with some troopers." So you talk about trust and the question you asked me there. It took a lot of trust for an individual that I hardly knew, that I had seen growing up because he would come visit his aunt periodically. But to trust me with his two young daughters, now day and age, you would never see that. I would never do that as an adult, to leave somebody that I did not know with my children. But he took a chance on me and he trusted me. And it was at that moment I saw what a family was supposed to be like. He was married, is still married today, and, you know, had his two beautiful daughters. And the way they lived was very different from the way that I lived.
How did your grandfather's words about you never being anything shape your inner narrative over the years?
Well, it was always the driving force for me, uh, in a very unfortunate type of way. When I failed at something, those words always pop back into my head. And those words were very simple. You're not worth a shit and you're never going to be shit. And those are words that I heard as a young child all the way to my high school days. So that seed had been planted. And now to change that within your mind is a very daunting, difficult task to do, especially when you fail at something that you set your heart and your mind to accomplish and it doesn't work out. Um, so those words resonated with me, and they resonated with me all the way until I hit rock bottom as an adult.
What's one sound or smell from your childhood that instantly brings you to that world in that house?
Man, the chicharras, the locusts,
The locust,
every
right?
the locusts. We were a very poor family. Um, again, because my father and my uncles depleted my grandparents' funds. They were either stealing the food from the pantry, or the televisions off the walls, or whatever shoes that we had, so they could go get their fix. Uh, so we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have window units. So at night, when it would start in the summers, when the sun would start to set, you could hear the locusts start to fly their wings and make that noise they make. And for me, it was kind of the unsettling piece of the night to know that, okay, this day was over.
How did your background affect the way you viewed drug users and dealers once you were making arrests or you were confronted by these realities in the street as a young trooper and later on as a special agent?
That's a great question, because that's changed throughout my adult life. But as a young troop, when I was doing highway interdiction, I was one of 16 troopers selected to be an elite force with the Texas Department of Public Safety. At that time, they were called criminal law enforcement troopers, and there was only 16 picked around the state. And I was very fortunate to be one of those. And you were picked and put into that position based upon your productivity on the highway and being able to locate criminal activity, drug traffickers, money launderers, any type of criminal element that was taking place on the highway. My forte was finding compartments that contained contraband, whether it be money, drugs, or weapons. Um, and that euphoria I got from finding those compartments, doing roadside interviews, doing the roadside searches, was the equivalent and parallel to that of an addict chasing their high. So that became my high. As the
The
years went on,
adrenaline rush.
the adrenaline, 100%. You're searching for that next adrenaline rush, and as time went on, the that doesn't feed you anymore. So now you're looking for something a little bit stronger. You're looking for something a little bit more daring. You're searching for that next high. Exactly what I would watch my father and my uncles go through. Um, as years went on, I used it to my advantage when I went into the covert world and started using those techniques to gain the cooperation of individuals I'd arrest. I had the background. I knew where they were coming from. I knew the life that they had lived. I knew their world, and that gave me an advantage in my world. That's what was able to set me apart in my interviews, is because I felt the pain that they were feeling and the decisions they made, because I understood it. I was very blessed and fortunate to have somebody come in my life, pluck me out of there, and give me an idea of what life was supposed to look like. And these individuals may or may not have had that or took advantage of that opportunity.
One of the things that a lot of people don't realize, that one of the most dangerous parts of police work is car stops. And when you work in tradition work as a trooper, or when you're in the NYPD or any other law enforcement agency, and you're working by yourself with no partner, and you stop a vehicle, you don't know what is inside that vehicle, especially at a time when people used to tint their windows all around, and they're not cooperative, and you're saying, should I go forward? Should I call for backup and wait in my vehicle at a far enough distance that I could react? Or do I go all the way up in a 45-degree angle, staying behind that window to try to talk to the driver, washing my sixes, because you have other windows and there might be people hiding in the back seat. Was that your take on that?
Not at all. Those things never really concerned me. What concerned me more than anything was being underneath a car, searching it, in a car rear-ending, my patrol car and smashing me in between them. But it usually, my roadside interviews lasted no longer than 5 minutes, and the location of the contraband would be shortly thereafter. Typically, when those things started to happening, or I could assess that there was criminal activity present, generally I'd get them off the road. They were patted down. At least the risk, I try to diminish it as much as I could. Being on the highway and working the highways are very different than working, the cities. The propensity for couriers to, engage in violence were a little lessened, because they didn't want you to find their narcotics. They didn't want you to find their monies. And they were just that. They were couriers. Unlike when you're working in the city, the game changes a lot.
Yeah. How did it feel to have strangers in suits evaluating your worthiness to serve, knowing what you had overcome?
When I first applied to DPS, I was 20 and a half years old. And I'm sitting there with a recruiter by the name of Ralph. Ralph Hernandez was his name. And by this time, I had enrolled in college. Now, keep in mind, I was not a straight A student. I was not even a straight B student. I think my GPA was a high 2, to say the least. I had taken the ASVAB twice. My score was not well enough to get into a position where the Navy would accept me. And I had been rejected by several colleges, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I really didn't. All I knew that I wanted to be a trooper, and I was going to do what I needed to do to ensure that goal was met. Sam Houston State accepted me, which is a college out of Huntsville, Texas. And I went there for a year and then transferred back to the University of Texas at San Antonio. And again, I didn't have any idea how to do any of these, how to enroll in school, how to procure funding, because we didn't have any money. My family didn't have money. I was going to have to do this all by myself. So I spent a lot of time with, the counseling services and the student aid services of each university so they could help me out. So when I finally met the minimum requirements, which was 60 hours of accredited college to apply to DPS, and they were accepting the applications. I went through the interview or the background, and Trooper Hernandez is reading what I know now was the criminal history of my parents. And as he's thumbing through the pages and he's raising his eyebrows and his facial expressions are saying it all, he looks at me and goes, I don't know that I'm going to be able to get you through. And he says, your dad was a bank robber. He's been arrested umpteen times for, aggravated assault, attempted murder. He's done federal prison time in Texarkana. And Richard, your mom's a prostitute. And hearing that for the first time as a young child, and I say a 20-year-old is a child because it is, not a young adult, your fight or flight kicks in. And what do? How do you respond? He goes, I don't know that I'm going to be able to pass you through this process. He goes, give me one good reason why I send you through, why I should send it through. So at this time, as my adrenaline's racing and my heart's pumping and I want to cry, I want to fight, I'm starting to sweat. And I say, sir, if you can just judge me by the man that I've become and not that of my parents, you won't be disappointed. So he sent it through. And I got through the first round of interviews and was rejected. And there was nothing worse than to get that letter than saying you don't qualify. And those words that my grandfather, spent years preaching to me, you're not worth the shit and you're never gonna be shit, pop back into your mind. So what do? And all the demons that you've been running from your whole life, that you're trying to break that cycle, and the foundation that's been laid to you at no cost of your own, it takes a lot of discipline. And I went through a bout of, depression where I didn't know what to do and I didn't know how I was gonna handle it. And thankfully I relied on my grandmother's words that she used to just tell me, mijo, just pray. And, so you go back to that foundation and you rely heavily on your mentors, and at that time was my friend Ray, and we pushed through. And the second time I re-enrolled in school and continued on to get my education and reapplied a year later. So being in front of those suits was really intimidating. I had no real interview skills. My only education was 60 hours of college. But the education I had gleaned from being on the streets with my dad selling heroin and, watching the activities of my mother, set me apart from the rest of the applicants. But at the time, I didn't know that.
Do you think it gave you a sense of having more empathy for people? Because in law enforcement today, there is a lack of that. I'm not saying all law enforcement officers, but you see it quite often that they judge a book by its cover without even opening it. And especially when you're dealing with people that have low incomes or people with emotional problems, people that are living in the street, I think a little bit of empathy will help the situation instead of making it worse for that person.
The empathy's come in my formative years and as I've gotten older. Maybe I've become a little more softer, but I always had a hard time with accepting people's excuses. because I could have made all the excuses in the world. I could have said, "Oh, I'm this way because, my father. I didn't have a father when he was around. He showed me how to balloon heroin and hold it in my mouth and drive through the west side of San Antonio and instruct me to swallow it if we were stopped by the police." That was how I knew life to be. Watching my uncles inject themselves, going with them to score, visiting my parents in prison and in jail. I could have made every excuse possible to live that life that they lived. But empathy in my young years wasn't existent. Uh, I used it to my advantage. Again, growing up and knowing that lifestyle on how to get people to confide in me and to trust me, so that ultimately I could continue to do my job. Now, in my formative years, uh, it strikes me in a certain way because they're not really the individuals that I've encountered don't have the motivation to want to break that cycle, and it's hurtful to me. So a part of me is like, man, you could do so much better with your life. You could look at your children here. You're living in this environment, and look what you're exposing them to. It's just heartbreaking.
How did you decide when to share your story with colleagues and when to keep it to yourself? And and
So,
and,
man,
and I tell you because I've seen it before. Everything is a phone call in most of the agencies, and you share with the wrong person, and all of a sudden is the broken phone, and it becomes a bigger story than it really is, and it could start an investigation on you without provocation.
so it wasn't until um, about 5 years ago with DEA, a good friend of mine and partner, and um, he's just been a strong mentor for me. And I met him in Colombia. His name is Tony Hubbard. He saw something in me, and he became somebody I confided in and I trusted. And I would tell them these stories in bits and pieces. He later on, we were partners in Colombia. He later on became my boss when I was in a position that oversaw all of South Texas. I reported to him in Houston. And he said, "Hey, Rich, there's this thing the DEA has. It's called the trauma team. I want you to be a part of it." I'm like, "Well, what is that?" He's like, "Well, it's a team that will respond in the event traumatic incidences happen to agents or their families, and you just have the ability to comfort and be there for folks." So through that program, there was a lady by the name of Adrian Wright Williams who was running it, and Dr. Harvey Goldstein. So I went to the initial training, and Dr. Goldstein pulled me aside, and he said, "Hey, there's something about you. Let's talk." So later on after the training, we met up at the hotel we were staying at, the lobby, and I showed him a little bit about my story, and he's like, "I think that you should start coming with us as we put this training on and talk to the executives of DEA." Now, these are the executives. These are the senior executives throughout DEA. So I said, "Okay, just let me know when and where." So the first time I did it, we were in Florida, and I told the executives and trauma team members my story from beginning to end, from childhood to adulthood. And it was at that time that a very powerful thing happened to me, and it was like a release of pent up emotions, and a weight had been lifted. And then DEA trauma team had me start doing this, or at least once or twice a year for the next 5 years.
And that was my next question. What was the first time you thought, I actually belong here?
It was not till I retired. Yeah,
And
not till I retired.
the importance about your work in your books is that it could save lives. A lot of people go their entire life with clinical depression, with all types of demons in their back from their childhood, their marriages, their problems at work. And it is important for them to have an outlet. And maybe writing is one of them. Talking to other people and helping them might help them heal. I don't know if you have the same view.
I do. And one of the things that was the most challenging for me was learning to forgive myself. And it wasn't until I met a very, very good friend of mine who has since passed by the name of Roland Esparza. When I got back from Colombia in 2012, I had always been a big workout guy. That's how I handled my emotions. That's how I handled my stress. That's how I handled my insecurities. Um, because I always felt like that's where I could control something. I could control what I did in the gym. And believe it or not, I was extremely insecure. Um, so much so where the look that I carried on my face, I hear it quite regularly. Did I intimidate, or people are intimidated to be around me, or did I give this vibe where I'm not approachable? Well, Roland, a lot like myself, had grown up in the west side of San Antonio, had put himself through law school, and was a very successful attorney here in San Antonio. Um, and he was the one that kind of cracked that nut per se. He We spent a lot of time together. 10 years. He was my best friend. We traveled. I met my wife through him. Um, he was just someone that, when you talk about trust, it really took trust to another level, because it was a friend. It was a true friendship that he didn't need anything from me. It wasn't based on, oh, I'm going to be your friend because you're a law enforcement officer, or I'm going to be your friend because you're rich, or I'm going to be your friend. It was a true friendship based on just that, friends. And he was the one that I confided in the most, and told the deepest, darkest secrets that I had. And he looked at me one day and he said, "Richard, you got to forgive yourself. You can't move forward until you forgive yourself." And I had been a therapist. I had, prayed relentlessly, but it was that one simple thing, to forgive yourself, that really just opened the doors for me emotionally, where I began to truly trust people, where I knew that for the first time, I made myself vulnerable. Now, keep in mind, by this time I had been married and divorced twice. I had been single for 10 years. Um, but with the relationship that Roland and I had, I learned two things: trust and forgive myself. Um, and it was an awakening time for me.
How do you deal with intrusive thoughts from your past while sitting alone in a patrol car in some highway in Texas?
Well, it wasn't just on the highway. It was when I would come home by myself. It would come home, and people loved and hated me at work. They loved me, bosses loved me because I put the numbers on the table, and I worked, and it was available at their mercy. My partners hated me because they were married, they had children, and every deal to me was more important than anything. So, I had them out at all hours of the night. Um, but when you came home, and the silence was deafening. That's where the drinking began, and the thoughts of depression, and sometimes my purpose in life. would come into question.
Did you develop any superstitions, habits, or rituals tied to certain times or mile markers in the highway?
On the highway, yeah, absolutely. I had my times that I had to be out there. I had my certain foods that I had to eat. A lot like a baseball player. I had my routine, and if my routine was off, I knew it would not be. It was going to be an off day.
What scares you more out in the highway, the bad guys or your own thoughts?
No, my own thoughts. Yeah, I was not afraid of the bad guys. For me, I was a risk taker. Um, Again, I chased that high, that adrenaline. You know, in the narcotic world, it's there is no black and white. And if you're gonna be successful, the mentality is you got to operate in the gray, and sometimes that gray, is closer to black than white.
How did the crash change your relationship with your own body, its limits, its fragility, and its resilience?
It became a routine. Wednesday nights, was at the bar. Thursday nights were the bar. Friday nights at the bar. Saturday nights the bar, and then Sunday you slept it off all day long, and found your time to work out in the morning. And it wasn't until you just realize and wake up going, okay, what am I doing to myself? Um, I can't continue to run like this, and that's what happened. The closet door crashed open, and I hit rock bottom,
Yeah,
emotionally and mentally.
alcoholism is a serious problem in law enforcement. Uh, and a lot of your own partners or whatever that see it going on, more or less not only tolerate it but encourage it. And they don't know the damage that they're doing to their friends or their partners.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't know again, a lot like junkies, you hang out with the people that have the same interest. And if you're all single or something may not be, but you live that lifestyle where um, it's more enjoyable to be drinking and celebrating your successes. Eventually, it comes back and catches up to you. And what happens there is bad decisions, debt, divorce, um, until you think you can outrun those demons that you're running from. They catch you.
How do you handle the guilt of enjoying the high of the job while asking God to keep you safe?
Man, there was a point in time where I questioned whether even God existed. Um, Considering everything that I went through and everything that I was going through mentally, emotionally. And I quickly realized that I shouldn't do that because I hit a bull going 110 miles an hour and then got T-boned by another car and was able to walk out of that wreck. And thinking about, man, it just wasn't my time. There was a blessing to be alive, and there was a lot that I still had to do on his behalf.
How did you view the time past, present, future shift during your recovery?
I'm able to stop and smell the flowers now versus just running by them. I have a 7 and a 6-year-old, and
They mean your life to you because you always bring them up, and I'm
yeah.
so happy for you. I think children bring they fill you up with a lot of emotion because you want them to do better than you. You want to give them what you didn't have, and be there for them. Which is the most important thing. They need nourishment, care, love, and that's what we as parents or grandparents have to do to our children, the family.
And I was growing up without that, being able to give it to them now. You're one or the other. I could have made a choice to not be involved in their lives at all, or I could, I made the choice to be in their life and hopefully they never have to live the life or be exposed to the life that I was, and set an example to where they can themselves be successful and give back and be respectful and do all the things that we want our children to be.
How do you process the tension of arresting people who reminded you of your own family while believing in God and mercy?
At the end of the day, we swore to take an oath, and arresting people, we're not arresting people that don't need to be arrested. They're doing harm to our communities. They're doing harm to our children, and we're protecting our children and our communities. And we've both seen it firsthand, the devastation and the carnage that the drugs and drug trafficking cause. People make decisions to violate and break the law. Um, and I feel like I've been put on this earth to do just a small part to keep our communities safer and clean. Um, I just have to tell myself at the end of the day that they made the decision to do what they did, and it's my job to ensure that I do my small part to bring them to justice.
How did your understanding of grace change your childhood to after the crash?
You know, for me, I'm just so truly blessed that I've been successful at the things that I've done. Um, and you can't do it alone. I tell people all the time, to be successful in this job and in this business, you got to have three things. One, you have to have a great support team and network, to include your family, to include your partners, to include your boss. You got to have a great prosecutor, whether it be a federal, state, and you got to have great intelligence driven communication and networks, whether it be informants, whether it be platforms to conduct investigations. Without any one of those three, you're not going to be successful. And you got to be able to communicate effectively and efficiently to bring those three together for the common goal and the common idea of that we're here to make the world a better place.
What was the biggest culture shock going from DPS highway work into the DEA machine?
The paperwork, the simplicity of doing the job, was a challenge in the initial phase of my DEA career, where I used to just jump in the car and go put somebody in jail on as a trooper, and now in DEA you're having to do an operational plan that includes a briefing, that includes permissions, one and two steps above, and you gotta find, make it convenient for everybody in your squad or in your group. You got to lay out specifics on how to do that. It took a while to realize that those steps were there for a reason, but it was a challenge.
How did it feel to realize that the paperwork and the politics and optics sometimes overshadow the real impact on the street?
You say it right there, the optics, perception. Decisions at times were made based on perception, not on doing what was right for the right reasons. And that was the frustrating part of it all, was realizing that, no, we can't do that because it's going to be perceived in a certain way. Well, how about what's right? And how about what's, doing what's right for the community? How about those things? And it was very frustrating for me. But again, as a fighter, as I mentioned, that I brought to the table with me, I always fought to continue on. And that's why I promoted. I didn't promote for the status or the glory of a title or a position. I promoted because I was going to fight for the guys and girls to be able to do their jobs with as little red tape and with little worry about perception from others, that they could do it effectively and efficiently. That was why I promoted.
Yeah, the vast majority of DEA agents, the men and women of the DEA, are great individuals, patriotic and very committed to their job. It's a team effort. I have a soft spot for the Drug Enforcement Administration since I was very young. Um, but there is a part of it, and this is my next question. How do you stay motivated when you feel operations were being slow or diluted for political reasons?
So at the end of the day, I used to tell the guys all the time, give them what they want so we can do what we want. Very simple concept. If they want A, okay, well, let's give them A. Let's satisfy them with A, but that doesn't mean we're not going to do B, C, and D. And it was sometimes the way I equate and the way I would tell rookies that were coming on the job, I met with every single one of them, was tell them very simple. Working for the DEA is like swimming upstream. You can choose to go to the middle of the current, or you can choose to walk along the banks. Which one you want to choose? Go out there and swim in the middle of the current, you're not going to get very far, and you're going to be pushed downstream. Walk along the sides, it's going to take you a little bit longer, it's going to be a little bit slower, a little bit more methodical, but you're going to be effective.
How did it feel to know that some of the people you were chasing operated more like CEOs of corporations than street criminals?
And that was what was good about working for DEA, is that we those are the individuals we target to dismantle and disrupt the criminal organizations from the highest levels. And those were the cat and mouse game per se of how to do it. And you had to be outside the box thinker. You had to be able to know what their next move were and see around the corner, as a good friend of mine, now the chief of Dallas Police Department, used to say. You got to be able to see around the corners and see things that people can't see. And that was the joy of working the highest violators in the world, not just in Texas, but of the world.
What is the one DEA success you're deeply proud of that almost no one outside the system knows about?
Well, it has to do with the personnel matter. So when I first got to McAllen, there was a couple of agents that really trusted me. Most of my career within DEA had been in Texas, with the exception of about 4 years. I was in charge of our special response team for the Houston Field Division, and through that I got to meet a lot of the agents within the Houston Field Division. And not only that, I had been in Houston Division most of my career, as I mentioned. So a couple of guys felt pretty comfortable and confident in approaching me, and I always made myself approachable. I love to hear from the boots on the ground. So one of the individuals came to me and said, "Hey, there's a guy that's applying. He's past the age waiver. He's not going to be allowed. He was at the time 37, 38 years old. Was a prior task force officer." But these guys came in really, really advocating for him. So I said, well, bring him in. Let's meet him. Let me see what I can do. So they brought me in. It was a kid by the name of Rodrigo, originally from Monterrey, Mexico. Had gone to high school in Harlingen at MMA, Military Marine Academy. Grew up very poor. And had joined the Marines. He was a former Marine, had gotten out and made his life in the McAllen area. So he comes in, and right away I'm impressed with the kid. So he tells me about his application process, that he's not making any headway, and he's not sure if he's going to be able to get in, but his dream was to be a DEA agent. That's all he ever wanted to do. So I said, okay, let's see what I can do. So and it's all about contacts and timing and the right people in the right place. So I had just came back from headquarters. I had been there, a year doing my headquarters time before I got to McAllen. And so some of the contacts that I still worked really well with were in the right places. So I called in a favor. And because he was in the military and had the experience, he didn't have a degree, they were able to get him through, and he successfully graduated the academy. We got him back to McAllen, and his dream was to go to work in an overseas spot, which I've been able to to facilitate that, and now he'll be working overseas here shortly. So for me, that's success. You can seize all the drugs in the world, you can put all the Maduros in the world in jail, but the legacy and importance of laying the foundation for someone else to succeed, I think outweighs any of those.
If you could change one structural thing about federal drug enforcement, what would it be and why?
There's a lot of red tape into um, working some of the bigger investigations, and it takes somebody with a lot of drive, a lot of discipline, uh, a lot of vigor to push through those dynamics. I would simplify things as much as I could. Uh, and again, I realize and understand, being there for 21 years, that there are things in place that are important and are there for a reason. However, there's also a lot of things in place that don't need to be there and can be changed. And sometimes those things can't be changed, but I would try to make it as simple as possible. And that's what I did at the level I was. I trusted my people. I empowered them to do the job. And sometimes, I may have not turned a blind eye, but gave them verbal authorities and permissions to do things that others wouldn't have been so willing to take those risks and chances.
When you study the cartel's leadership, what qualities do you secretly wish you saw more on our side?
Trust. Trust. People don't trust their bosses. Bosses don't trust their people.
How did you emotionally handle or recognize the bad guys often had better unity and clarity than your own chain of command?
It was disappointing because you're not the first person to ask that question. I think a lot of times cartels operate off of fear, um, and greed, which within law enforcement we operate off of brotherhood and unity. Uh, and what happens is, oftentimes, is the betrayal from the brotherhood, um, where you think are your friends are not your friends, that are using you to get certain placements or positions, and I think we've all experienced that, and that's the disheartening thing, the professional jealousy, and I don't believe that the criminal underworld operates that way. Um, I think they understand, to be successful, um, they have to minimize their risk, and how to do so. How you do that? You you empower and trust your folks.
What do you learn about the long term vision from watching how groups like the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel, and others operated?
They operate just like a business. I mean, just like some of the largest businesses in the world. Um, they're very strategic. They're very smart. They're very calculating, uh, and they operate off of fear. And there's a lot that can be accomplished when you operate off of fear, and recourse, negative recourse. Um, that's the thing, that they're very smart and calculating, and they know how to manipulate people.
How did it feel to know that some of your best wins were around error to the larger machine?
It wasn't so much error around the machine. It was more like luck. Being I always tell people that I'd rather be lucky than good any day of the week, because sometimes you just catch that break. Sometimes targets just make a mistake, and because you're there, you're disciplined, and you stead the course, um, and you kept on goal, and you work with like-minded people that had the same passion and vigor as you do. Uh, you're able to change that luck.
You describe leadership as gravity. What are the essential traits that create that kind of pull?
Um, you got to have a charismatic leader. You got to have someone again that knows how to communicate, that listens, and surrounds himself or herself with people that are not like you. To be successful, you got to have people around you that'll help you see things that you can't see. If you surround yourself with people that are just like you, then you're going to be very linear thinking. And in leadership, you want to have a 360 view. You want to see everything around you. And what happens and what allows that gravitational pull is, being approachable, uh, being respected, and giving respect. But more importantly, and anything than that, as having your people know that they can hold you accountable as a leader. I used to tell the agents that work for me all the time, I'm going to hold you accountable, but I expect you to do the same to me. And if I'm messing up, I want you to tell me. I don't want you to be afraid to come in here and say, hey, boss, that was a bad decision because of A, B, and C. And I'll own it gladly, without any issues. I'll take responsibility. But at the same token, if you want me to be available and work 110%, well, guess what? I want the same from you in return.
How do you differentiate between someone who wants authority and someone who carries through weight in a room?
Oh, you can tell right away. That's what I call closed door leadership. Closed door leadership, you got the bosses that close the door. You got to make appointments with them. You got to call the secretary before you can talk to them. You can tell right away when you walk in a room that person and who they are, who pounds their fist on the desk because you're going to listen to me because I'm the boss. That approach is alive and well, unfortunately. And what that does, that creates a following, because then the person that accepts that type of leadership becomes that type of leader. And it's unfortunate.
Most of the leaders I had when I was in the military had an open door policy, especially the sergeant majors, the first sergeants, and the company commanders, and even some colonels. When you go up to generals, then you have to make an appointment because you have the whole division going after in and out of their office, and you have the chain of command that we have to respect. But I really appreciate that type of leader, the leader that is approachable, that wants to be involved in the day-to-day operation, that wants to know what is needed in the field, what equipment is failing, why it's failing, and it gives you that support. I think in law enforcement, you have a few, but you have a lot of empty suits that really, they're in their own business, I think.
So there's two things about leadership that I think are fundamental and important to me. People oftentimes promote because they want to do less work. They don't want to be out on surveillances anymore. They don't want to work the 12-hour shifts. They don't want to be standing at the intersection. They don't want to be standing in the rain working a wreck. So they promote for the wrong reasons. And for me, promoting was never about that, because I realized that once I promoted, their problems became my problems. And if I slept 6 hours a day as an agent, well, now I knew I was going to sleep 3 hours a day because, an agent's wife was going through breast cancer, or an agent was going through cancer, or an agent had a drinking problem. Those problems became my problems, and that was going to cause me to work harder. And unfortunately, people that promote don't take those things into consideration when they promote. They're doing it because, oh man, I'm going to get an extra $10,000 a year in my retirement. Well, that's the wrong reason to promote. Regarding equipment and being in touch with my people, one of the things that I always made a point to do was go out with them. And I went out on surveillances with them. I went out and hit houses with them. And what that did is, number one, it developed a lot of trust. See, I center around trust. It developed trust. But what it also did was let me know the challenges they were facing. I'm not leading from an ivory tower and hearing about it and coming up with excuses when they came up to see me. Hey, we need A, B, and C. I got to see it firsthand. Hey, these radios aren't working. Why do we have these? Let's find out a solution, because I got to live with them. So now, as opposed to fighting them and being part of the red tape, I was an advocate to help them change and get what they needed to be successful. And that's true leadership.
What behavior from a so-called leader immediately erodes your trust?
Oh man, the talking about one leader to me. If you were going to talk about one of your subordinates, then I know you talk about me. You know, also creating division and competition within your areas. You know, I used to work for an individual that, you know, that was at my level, and he used to enjoy the spirit of competition between the groups, and all that did was cause a division. All that did was, because one group had so many arrests and the other one was lacking, you know, it caused friction, and that's unnecessary when we should all be working together.
That's that technique of divide and conquer.
100%. Yeah, I did not agree with that.
Yeah. What does standing in front look like practically, not just as a slogan?
Standing in front is, you know, that's a lot of responsibility. You know, I didn't take that responsibility lightly. Again, I always made myself approachable to where I knew what the troops needed. Now, again, I couldn't meet all of their needs. Some were not going to be happy, but the ones that worked. And the ones that didn't work, well, you know, I still advocated for them, but there wasn't as much focus and emphasis on the ones that just laid down.
How do you protect unity when personalities crash and stress is high?
Through integrity, through communication. You got to be that rock that understands that every person is going through something that they don't want to share. And it's easy to hide. Like, you know, I used to tell people all the time, I was the best undercover agent in the world, not on the streets, but within my office. You would never know what I was going through emotionally and mentally. And sometimes we don't know what's going on with our personnel because they're afraid to talk about it, because they don't trust you, or because they're embarrassed, or whatever the case may be. So you had to adapt and adjust and recognize when things aren't going quite well for the whole team.
And there is a danger of suicide in law enforcement, and not being able to see the tell signs of somebody in distress within your operation or your squad or your own partner. You know, we all carry guns with ammunition. We're out in the street. The demons are following you. You might have a breakup with the family, and it pushes you towards being tunnel vision and you know, hurting yourself. And I think that we have lost a lot of law enforcement officers in the last couple of years. Whether in New York and other states, you know, you open up the paper and some law enforcement is taking their life. And I also see the problem that when people try to look for psychological solutions within law enforcement, they automatically get put into the rubber gun squad. They get ostracized, and they might take their guns for 2 or 3 years, and nobody wants to talk to them, and it causes more of a problem than it actually helping the officer deal with the traumatic experience he's going through at that moment.
You know, that's huge, and that's why I believe so much in the peer-to-peer network and coaching. Is Number one, we have to remove the stigma of weak-minded individuals. I grew up like that. I grew up with my grandfather calling me the P word and using derogatory terms to belittle me and demean me. And his thought process was it's going to make him tougher and stronger. Well, it didn't. It just made me an asshole. Um, and it made me want to fight. And that fight or flight response for me was alive and well. And generally, I fought. Um, in the law enforcement arena, especially in the federal government, the stigma of approaching a counselor is alive and well because people are afraid of the recourse when it comes to the background investigations. And that's why I advocate and talk to people so much about finding a mentor, finding someone that you trust outside of the job, in the job, whoever you think that might be, that you can bear your sins and sorrows without judgment, without recourse. And I think that's what helped me out so much. I didn't trust anybody in the job enough to go and tell them how I was feeling or what I was going through. It wasn't until I developed friendships outside of the job. And that's what always was key for me, is having friends outside of the job. It helped me stay grounded. It helped me, not be so judgmental to the public about, it's us versus them. So that was fundamentally important to me. And when I talk to agents still today that call and confide in me about what they're going through, their common response is, "Man, thanks for listening to me," because it's no judgment. I'm not providing them a solution. I'm just listening to them, and that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give to somebody.
You describe burnout as ash, not fire. What did that ash face look like in your life?
I was melted. I was empty, and unfortunately the people that pay their price for my family.
What small behaviors, forgetfulness, irritability, isolation, told you something deeper was happening within you?
Oh, it was all of those. It was all of those things. The frustrations with the professional jealousy is kind of what broke the camel's back for me. There was a time in my career where a series of letters went to our administrator at the time that were anonymous, and they were written with the right language in there to cause eyebrows to raise. And it was all strategic to keep me from getting to the next level. And that's where I knew that it was time for me to start removing myself from that environment.
What do you wish leaders understood about the cost of labeling someone rock solid for too long?
I think people get complacent, and the expectations continue to rise. If you want, if you ask for 5, you get 5. Well, guess what? Now the sentiment is, well, you can give me 6 because I know you're capable. Well, guess what? You can give me 7 because I know you're capable. And that's rock solid is, you can trust that guy to get the job done. But a lot of times we don't see at what cost that occurs when we continue to push that 1% of the people to that level. I used to tell people all the time, it's 1% of the people that do 99% of the work. And what do? We concentrate on that 1% of the people, and we continue to push them, and they continue to drive. And I always made it a point to tell people, and the guys that work for me, is like, look, God, family, and job. I appreciate and value your hard work, but I need you to be balanced. I need you to be equally yoked with your family and the job. You give one more than the other, and one is going to fail. Don't live with regret. And that was one of the hardest things that I've had to accomplish is forgiving myself and living with regret.
How do you handle being physically safe at home but mentally still in a raid house or in a dark highway?
We all live with that fear, uh, where our heightened awareness is, we bring it home, unfortunately, and being able to lower that is a very, very challenging task when you're with your families. Um, you know, Sleeping with the doors unlocked at night sometimes, uh, when you forget to close them, you can't help but think, man, what if, and the what ifs behind that. Um, and then you go out with your families on the streets, and you're constantly being vigilant about, who's around you and what's going on. And we live in a very different time today.
How did working in Colombia change your view of the drug war compared to your Texas and border experience?
Ooh, that is, it definitely was an education, to say the least. And seeing how, you know, the amount of people and assets that go into um, making a seizure. But not only that, but how the cartels operate and the amount of people they have to facilitate their businesses, what it takes. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people that are involved in either moving or transporting cocaine and the laundering of those drug proceeds. And, you can't help but go, man, are we fighting something that's never going to end?
What did the nickname Mijo mean to you in this season of your life?
Man, it's that's what everybody calls me, that's what I'm known to, and my home, and with my son, and with my in-laws, and in DEA world. Um, it's a term that I don't take lightly. I'll say that.
We're getting close to the end. I hope that this is not the last interview I conduct with you. We have so much to talk about.
Yeah, we do. We just barely touched the surface, man.
Right. Um, if you had to give new agents and new officers out there a piece of advice, what will that be?
Put your God and family first. Yeah.
Where can they get your book? Can you give, the audience how they could order your book? Because I know
Yeah,
it's
so
coming out by the 11th.
yes, sir. So it's available at 1910publishing.com or oneteamg.com.
And give us your company's name if people want to hire you as an expert or to as a consultant.
Yes, sir. I can be found on the internet at One Team Global is my company name, and I'm also on LinkedIn at Richard T. Sanchez, which is where I'm most active at, is on LinkedIn.
Your books in the future might be put in Spanish also.
That is correct. Yes, we're working on the audio book now, and definitely we'll do the translating and transcribing for several languages. So hopefully that's coming in the near future.
One last question. At what point did you realize you were planning for a life after the job, even if you weren't ready to say it out loud?
When I got to Europe. So we arrived in Europe. Ooh, we've been back in the United States 1 year now. When we arrived in Europe, the transition was a little challenging. And I just knew that my heart probably wasn't where it needed to be and should have been. And therefore, I was doing a disservice to the United States government, to myself, and to my family. And I started looking for opportunities to retire.
Richard, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's an honor talking to you, and I hope that in the near future we do a second part to this interview, because we have so much to talk about that we didn't scratch. And I want to take this opportunity to thank the men and women in our own services and the Drug Enforcement Administration and other law enforcement agencies that took part in the removing of Maduro, the arrest of Nicolas Maduro and his wife today in Venezuela. And I pray for you guys to come back home safe. And great job. Continue doing that excellent job that Marcos has, the United States government, which is very impressive.
No, but more importantly, thank you. Like I mentioned so many times throughout our interview, there's people that have come into my life and catapulted me into opportunities and positions, and I've never forgotten those individuals. And sir, I thank you very much. This is the first podcast that I've done at this level and magnitude, and I truly am humbled and honored to be on your show. And I look forward for the future and more things to come. And like you mentioned also, to our brothers and sisters in blue, that and not only in law enforcement but in uniformed services, not only in the United States but across the world. There's men and women across the world that are fighting to keep our communities safe and want the best for their families. And I hope and pray for them every day.
Thank you, and send my love and prayers to your kids and your wife and your family.
Thank you, sir.
And I thank you, mi hermano.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you.
This concludes this episode of Equalizer. I want to thank my guest, Richard T. Sanchez, for joining me and sharing his experience, his insights and leadership and resilience, and the story behind his new book, Chasing the High. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Equalizer. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like, share with your family and friends, and follow me through the links provided on the screen. A special thanks to our production team. Without their dedication and hard work, this program will not be possible. Until next time, I'm William Acosta, and this has been Equalizer. Stay informed, stay safe, and God bless you.